Know me, I'm Don Harris. I'm the Vice Provost and Chief Information Officer for the university, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back after lunch and kick off the afternoon session. In thinking about this session and what kind of brief comments I could make to you, I was tempted to, and actually did go on a little trip down memory lane for me. When I came in 2005, one of the things that came with the job was being the University of Oregon representative on the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium. This is a group of colleges and universities in the Pacific Northwest, and by the way, that's very broadly defined as everything from Hawaii to Montana, Alaska to Oregon. The group was formed by a very unique opportunity, and that is that a number of the institutions actually owned a network back in the 90s. And when they sold the network, they got a windfall of about $10 or $12 million. They created this not-for-profit organization, the purpose of which was to support the institutions who were members. And one of the things that they did was to create a series of grant opportunities for faculty in member institutions. Being able to, and one of the jobs that I've had has been as the University of Oregon representative on the grant committee. So that's really been quite exciting because so many of the grants, not all, but many of the grants that this group has given up to $15,000 in startup funds to have been for projects in the digital humanities. In fact, many of our panelists up here, including others that were speakers today, are ones that actually received these grants. And just kind of looking back over the last few years, even going back to 2003 where Nancy Chang received a grant for her tracing ideas through digital sketching. We had a couple of grants in 2004, one with the Yamada Language Lab, then Mark Schlossberg had one for GIS, GPS technology, and Jim Tice had the first Noli Map project back in 2004 as a proof of concept grant. More for the Yamada Center in 2005. We had some things going on in poetry in 2006 and with Second Life in 2006. In fact, the only year I could find out that we didn't really have a good humanities project was 2008, which was the last year that they gave awards. But we did have one from the University of Oregon. It turned out to be someone in the business school, which was fine as well. But part of what I wanted to reference in telling you this was how inspiring it was for the people not only on the grant committee, but for many of the faculty at those representative colleges and universities who looked at the website to see what was going on at the University of Oregon in the digital humanities. The work that you're doing, the research that you're doing, really was quite inspiring to people all over the Pacific Northwest, and including people outside the Pacific Northwest, because I've heard from some of my colleagues, including colleagues in Asia, that this is a site that they have bookmarked, that they go and they take a look at, and not only at the projects themselves, but as the projects continue on and reports are made, they go and look and see what the follow-up was and what kinds of interesting, exciting things that you're doing and that are happening here at the University of Oregon. It's also exciting because that website and the opportunities that it raises, and by the way, I'll be happy to share that website with you. If any of you want the link, just send me a note to cio@uoregon.edu, and I'll be happy to send that to you. Has also provided the opportunity for people to connect between institutions. So it allows faculty to be able to see, gee, there's faculty at these other three institutions in the Pacific Northwest doing something similar that I am. Maybe we could apply for a grant together. We could share information or share data and those kinds of things. So I just want to encourage you with that, saying that people really do appreciate what you're doing. They appreciate it all over the world, and encourage you to continue any opportunities you have for collaboration. And that includes the opportunities to be able to collaborate in seeking funding, either through your respective colleges or perhaps through the strategic initiatives process. One of the things that we are starting this year with Provost Jim Bean is an IT council that he has asked me to chair. That council will be one of the filters, if you will, for people who are submitting proposals in the strategic initiatives process. And I think, like in the past, part of what would be very, very encouraged are proposals that show collaboration between disciplines, between schools, and those kinds of things. So I'm very excited about this particular session because it really focuses on what's happening here at University of Oregon. And so with that, let me turn it over to Doug and ask him to introduce his panel.
Thanks, Don. I very much appreciate your remarks. And one of the things that I very much appreciated about this day is that there are representatives, of course, here from the various departments and programs at the University of Oregon, but also we have representatives here from both the library and information services, both of which have been crucial to moving the university forward in the directions that we've been talking about. My name is Doug Blandy. I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs for the School of Architecture and Allied Arts, and I also direct the Arts and Administration program within that school. It's my pleasure to facilitate this panel where you're going to hear about some of the extraordinary projects, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that because one of them's mine, so you can decide about mine or not, but at least the others on the panel, the extraordinary work that they're doing. So on the panel are John Fenn and I, who will be talking about our project called China Vine. J.Q. Johnson will be representing Massimo Lolini's project, the Oregon Petrock Open Book Project. Carol Stabile and Kara Estlin will be talking about their Fembot project, and James Tice and Eric Steiner will be talking about the Noli Map project, the VASI project associated with Rome. What each project will have is about 15 minutes to give you an overview of the project. There should then be about 5 minutes for questions, leaving us some time at the end for general questions and discussion as well. So John Fenn and I are going to talk with you about the project China Vine. I'm going to make some introductory remarks setting the project in context, and then John will talk specifically about some recent field work that he's been doing and the interpretation associated with that field work. So the mission of China Vine is to educate English-speaking and reading children, youth, and adults about the cultural heritage of China. This mission is achieved through the Creative Commons licensed website, chinavine.org, a blog, numerous social networking sites in the United States and China, exhibits, and a 2011 summer Beijing-based field school that John and I will direct. China Vine first emerged as a partnership between scholars associated with the Center for Community Arts and Cultural Policy at the University of Oregon, the Cultural Heritage Alliance at the University of Central Florida, the Folk Art Research Institute at Shandong University of Art and Design in Jinan, China in 2006. Since then, scholars from the folklore program at Beijing Normal University, the Beijing Folk Literature and Art Association, the Chinese Folk Literature and Art Association, and the Shanghai Folk Literature and Art Association are partnering with the project as well. There are also some additional universities in the United States that have joined, the University of Maine and the Ohio State University being two. Information about the project has been circulated through numerous professional groups, including the National Art Education Association, the American Folklore Association, the International Society for Education Through Art, and the United States Society for Education Through Art. At this point, close to 100 scholars, graduate students, and undergraduate students have contributed to the project since its inception. And these contributors are associated with the fields of folklore, art and humanities, linguistics, and cultural policy. Kristen Congdon at the University of Central Florida and I are the founding and principal co-investigators associated with the project, and John Fenn joined the project in 2009 as an investigator. At the University of Oregon, the current China Vine team, in addition to John and I, consists of graduate students Tomas Valadares, who's a Haystack scholar, Nathan Gillis, who's in the School of Journalism and Communications, and Nan Yang, who's a graduate student in Arts and Administration. Tomas is ChinaVine's operations manager. Nathan is conceptualizing and implementing the ChinaVine's use of social networks, and Nan is assisting with translation and audience development in China. The questions being considered by those of us associated with ChinaVine include the following. How is ChinaVine contextualizing objects for the purpose of communicating their makers' lives and the importance of the traditions represented by the objects? And in what ways does ChinaVine facilitate a communicative relationship between the people who are being represented and the participants with the website? How does ChinaVine cultivate a common purpose while acknowledging the differences among disciplinary approaches in the United States and China? And when disciplinary approaches collide, how are these collisions mediated, represented, and used for educational purposes? How is ChinaVine contributing to critical debates over the roles of technology, education, and shifting paradigms of media by presenting the parallel yet intertwined exercises of cultural practice and humanities research as manifest in the digital domain? And what programming and design strategies have been used in this project to take advantage of the innovation that scholars and students bring to the project while simultaneously creating a management system that allows for ease of use, maintenance, and sustainability? ChinaVine is in its second iteration, moving into a third that focuses on increased interactivity. And how have the transitions between these iterations been managed, and what is the process for futures planning for the project? ChinaVine consists of 4 volumes focusing on 11 villages in Shandong, 7 folk artists in Beijing, and 2 Miao festivals and 2 Miao performance centers in 4 villages in Guizhou. A typical entry on the site will consist of text, photographs, and video, which together create a narrative about artist, art form, location, and cultural heritage. In process is material associated with contemporary art and music in Beijing, folk artists in Shanghai and Beijing, and the poetry of Aku Wu in Sichuan province. Significant to the project is our current effort to transfer the content to WordPress MU for content management. This is being accomplished with the assistance of Kirsten Heyerholzer, who's here in the audience. Raise your hand. Kirsten has been invaluable in the work that we're doing, and her group is extraordinary. At the Knight Library. Using WordPress MU, we will allow for the integration of Web 2.0 participatory strategies to build a dynamic community of scholars, teachers, students, and interested others from around the world. Kirsten and her group have assisted ChinaVine in identifying categories such as art, artists, place, participate to aid navigability, along with extensive systems of tags permitting visitors to efficiently find content associated with their interests. Materials will also be geotagged for location on an interactive map. Using a breadth of Web 2.0 tools such as blogging, Flickr, Vimeo, and SoundCloud, the number of scholars able to add content to the site will increase. In addition, students, instructors, and the public in general will be able to add and respond to content on the site as well. Using Google Analytics, we know that close to 7,000 unique visitors accessed ChinaVine in the past year. Visitors represent approximately 32 countries, with the largest number of visitors living in the United States, followed by China. Visitors in China were associated with 122 eastern and centrally located cities, and during this past year, between 70 and 87% of visitors were new. No new content has been added to the current website, while the Interactive Media Group has been working on the transfer. Beginning in the fall, ChinaVine's team began concentrating on developing the presence of the project on Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, Vimeo, and SoundCloud. Interest is growing in ChinaVine through these sites. Flickr and Vimeo in particular are proving to be excellent forums for distributing content. As best we can tell, the majority of our contacts through these sites are new and include Chinese artists and fellow documentarians on Chinese culture. And this interest on the part of people in China has been motivated us to launch a ChinaVine presence on Chinese social networking sites such as RenRen, Sina, and Tudo. Now, given the fields represented by ChinaVine scholars, our questions are being addressed through a variety of methods, including, but not limited to, ethnography, history, aesthetics, art, visual anthropology, visual sociology, cultural studies, media studies, material culture studies. And it's important to note that because scholars associated with China Vine are associated with the U.S. and China, common methodological and interpretive ground is central, or finding common and methodological and interpretive ground is central to the project. So now John Fenn's going to talk about some recent work that he's been doing that will be added to the site and the particular approach that he's taking.
Thank you, Doug. Is it possible to kill some of these lights? Do we know?
We can kill this one as long as you're looking on your screen.
I'll be looking at only screens. My presentation depends somewhat on no, that's not it. Where did you put the? Well, let's get it this way. Let's get in here. And I built this, in Prezi, thinking it'd be all fancy, and then projector doesn't work so well. So we'll go from there. So I'm going to build on what Doug did as an introduction here, talk about the kind of scholarship I've been doing and the kind of inquiry I've been pursuing since coming on board. And I'm hoping to resonate with, modulate, echo the themes of entanglement and some of the ideas that came up in this morning's panel, especially in terms of the digital as object of study, thinking about the kinds of musicians and artists I've been looking at and helping us look at in terms of the way they use digital technologies to create and distribute their art, and then how we might use digital technologies to take a look at their art and think about what it means in light of the China Vine project. This really great video is going to run, and it's okay, because I'll make this Prezi public and you'll be able to see it. The video might get better in a second. And I'm going to explain to you kind of what we're listening to and hearing. It's only, luckily, partially important. The video I put together, you'll see in a second, it opens up with one shot, but then it starts morphing into these layered things. And it's a series of clips that have been the past 2 years with contemporary musicians, noise musicians, experimental musicians, who are intersecting traditional methods as well as new methods and aesthetics, sort of interrogating them through their own art practices. I put this video together in order to help create an exhibit that the UO Confucius Institute asked us to do for their launch in September. So this was running in the JSMA. This video was projected, it was about this big, a living photograph on a larger panel of still photos. Trying to kind of get this intermedia, transmedia thing going on, and trying to document, present, interpret these artists. The soundtrack that we're listening to is actually the soundtrack that emerges in this video as I layered all these different clips together. So it was accidental in a way. We're hearing the sound of 2 or 3 video clips right now layered on top of each other. I didn't do any mixing. However, and so what I did is, hearing this and thinking, well, this is kind of neat, we wanted an audio presence in the exhibit, I used a piece of software, and I'll get to tools in a second, to create a 30-minute sound loop that ran about 3 times during the exhibit while the exhibit was up. It sampled parts of this accidental soundtrack and incorporated field recordings I had made, as well as some Creative Commons licensed sound loops from one of the artists, whom I'll talk about in a second. So I created a non-accidental thing out of an accident. And then, in another way, this soundtrack was not accidental, because about maybe 9 months before I was asked to put this together, before we actually put it together and exhibited it, I had been fooling around with a way to mash up pieces of ethnographic interviews with some of the art practice of one of the artists, a group by the name of FM3. Some of you may be familiar with them. They're internationally known. In order to present an interview experience the China Vine team had with one half of the duo FM3, a fellow by the name of Zhang Zhen, who lives in Beijing. His partner in the group, Christian, I'm forgetting his last name right now, is from Nebraska but also lives in Beijing, and together they form this group FM3, which is a very experimental and sort of kind of genre-defying and also genre-defining group that is well known for the Buddha machines. I don't know if anyone has heard one, and I forgot to bring them. I have the iPhone app if you want to see it later. The Buddha machines are these tiny little boxes that have 9 digital loops inside of them on a tiny intentionally lo-fi chip. They're referencing Buddha boxes, which are traditionally given out for free in various Buddhist temples from a variety of Buddhist backgrounds for people to meditate to. So FM3 decided to release that as an album. They made their own loops. They also Creative Commons licensed these loops and post them on their website for people to freely download and remix in whatever way they want. So I was thinking of ways to engage their aesthetic practice with our ethnographic practice, and created some files that I posted to SoundCloud and that are going to become part of the new China Vine experiment. In creating those loops, part of my inspiration was this interview experience we had where Zhang Jian was not just an interviewee with 6 of us sitting around asking him questions interminably, but he was kind of sculpting our experience, sculpting our time as a trickster. He was making jokes. He was performing this really elaborate tea thing for us. And it was more than just an interview. It was kind of a time we had there. And I'm gonna kind of zoom out from this video right now and take a look at if we can. We're gonna be able to see the text. This projector is worse than ours in our classroom. What I listed here was some of the tools I used in doing this. Doug already mentioned SoundCloud, and I'll show you SoundCloud in a second. I used Live 8 by Ableton, and I also used Final Cut Pro. Just some of the digital tools that allowed me to start to think in a non-linear manner towards the goals of what I thought I was trying to do here. Non-linear analysis of mashup of creative and critical thinking, or the aesthetics of the artists we work with as a way to represent their work and also interpret it, maybe. The term I don't have a good term for this yet, but I was trying to do kind of erotic inquiry, kind of best I've done so far. These are some of the goals of what I've been trying to do with this stuff. And like I said, in effect, seeking to employ the aesthetic strategies of the artists we're working with in order to explain them. Almost all of the artists that we interviewed so far who are working in experimental underground music, largely in Beijing, employ this sort of mashup, mixology kind of approach to doing things. It's very much embedded in what they're doing. I do have 1 minute, so I want to back out of this video and actually go over and just show you SoundCloud really quick. So this is a tool both for distributing content and eventually creating new. If you're not familiar with SoundCloud, you can people can make their tracks private, but if they're public and you have a SoundCloud account, you can annotate them and comment on them. So it becomes a kind of way of enabling this participatory thing that the new China Vine website redesign is aiming for, trying to use social media and digital tools of distribution in order to engage larger conversations about art and digital culture. So that's my 7.5 minutes on the China Vine stuff. So hopefully I've left it open enough that there'll be some questions afterwards.
So we have about 5 minutes for questions or comments on this project.
I can field them from, yes, I'm portable, so.
I mean, one of the interesting things that's going to happen as a result of what John's been talking about is people will be able to take these loops and they'll be able to mix them and then put them back up on the site for other people to experience.
Yeah, all the content we put up will be Creative Commons licensed as well, based on the, again, the ethics of remixing that the artists have embraced, for sure. Oh, yes. So Andrew asked me to repeat the question. There's nothing to repeat yet. Perfect. So what I'll do is I'm certainly going to make this Prezi publicly available. Oh, in the back. Oh, Kate. All right, Kate. All right, so Kate Mondlock has asked where I see this project going. And that's a very good question because as Doug noted, we haven't posted any of this content yet. I've been furiously generating it over the past year and it's a lot of fun to make. We've gotten some vague feedback from the Chinese Folk Literature Association, the head. He thought it sounded really like a really neat idea, a different way to present art, contemporary Chinese art through this method. But I see it as kind of pushing the boundaries of how digital humanities and digital tools, again, looking at the digital culture as object of study, but also using these digital tools to create a kind of non-linear way of thinking about it that is not entirely text-based, but then ultimately was something I could write about or people could engage in conversations about, but also have some other objects or entities to look at and deal with. I'm hoping it'll also, in the participatory environment of the new ChinaVine site, will get people to remix things or add their own insights into it. You know, people who are big fans of FM3. I mean, one of the struggles I had in trying to write the description about FM3, and this is not necessarily something that the first iteration of ChinaVine encountered, is that there's so much on the web about FM3. I mean, they have all these Wikipedia entries. They have their own 2 or 3 of their own blogs. They have a Vimeo channel, a YouTube channel. So they're already out there talking about themselves and promoting themselves, and people are interpreting them. You know, there's umpteen million reviews of each iteration of the Buddha machine. So for me to kind of digest all that into one little neat paragraph on the ChinaVine page seemed kind of like a silly exercise because there's so much out there already. I mean, I could have just put a series of links to learn more about FM3, go read this, go read this. But at the same time, as a scholar, I kind of want to put my interpretation on it. So it's that text as well as this stuff that I think. So that's I want to push the project in some unknown direction too at this point.
Just, and if I could expand, I thought your comment this morning was interesting about digital as tool, as digital as object of study. In a sense, this project is both, in that we're creating this dynamic learning community that we're watching unfold, and in the process of that, that's helping us work with our students who are cultural workers to know how to advance the kind of work that they're doing. In turn, there are going to be and are already young people across this country who are engaging with this content and will help shape it through participatory strategies. In addition, which we didn't anticipate, there's growing interest in this project in China. And so what we're going to be looking at in probably the coming year is how to work with that growing audience in a way that makes it meaningful for them as well.
Jonathan Jiffa.
Yeah, I just wanted you to say more about the difference between your writing about it as a scholar and all the information that's out there. I mean, the internet's full of information. It's not the same as scholarship.
No.
Right.
No.
So,
Yeah.
how do you see the difference, especially in the multimedia environment? Like, it's a journal article, 50 from a magazine article, they're all
Mm-hmm.
put in your space. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so Jonathan Stern has asked about the difference between the kind of writing that I might do as a scholar and the other stuff, the multitude of things available about any one of the artists. FM3 is the most prominent right now, and I think that it's part of it is sort of engaging in this kind of free-form, nonlinear inquiry through doing this creative process has pushed me to think about, for example, what FM3 does in a slightly different way than I've read about people interpreting them, right? A lot of the stuff written about them is from either experimental music blogs or journalists who are covering them as this sort of new thing emerging out of old China. I mean, all these old new dichotomies we've been talking about all morning are used to describe a wide range of cultural phenomena. And so I think my writing on the ChinaVine site is probably going to be different from any other kind of writing I do because of the audience of the ChinaVine site. We don't have overly academic prose. It's written for a general audience, K through 20, largely. So very general. So we try to it sticks to the more descriptive end of analysis and interpretation. Again, in collaboration with Chinese partners, Chinese scholars who are working on similar stuff who have helped us. So my writing is going to, I think, be multifaceted or multimodal. There'll be some of that's going to end up on the ChinaVine page that might just be a distillation of stuff that already exists, or a pointing to, in this case, to different resources and a kind of gathering of them. And then I think also there'll be some writing that'll come out of it that'll maybe talk about processes of interpretation and analysis trying to wrangle some of this stuff that I just spent 7 minutes trying to wrangle. So I think it'll hopefully give some critical reflection on what digital humanities, digital scholarship can be, in addition to illuminating the kinds of aesthetic practices that contemporary experimental musicians in China are engaging.
And in addition, the scholarly content will be accessed in particular ways, and then through the link that's called Participate is where other people who are not part of the scholars, who are officially associated with that, the scholarly part of the project, where that conversation will unfold.
Yeah, so it's also emerging too. I think I don't have a very firm idea of how my writing would differ, but I have this sort of intuitive sense that I will, by doing this sort of stuff, it'll push me to think about it and write about it in different ways than is already out there.
So we should move
Okay.
to the next project.
Okay. A moment here for technology change. So I'm not Massimo Lolini. My name is J.Q. Johnson. Massimo this morning reported that he was ill and was unable to make it, so I'm pinch hitting with very minimal preparation. That means that I'll be talking about something a little bit different, very much a small piece of Lolini's Oregon Petrock Open Book Project, rather than about Massimo's project, as you might hope to hear in this presentation. I'm going to, I think, start with the PowerPoint presentation, but not keep going very long, and start by keying off Jonathan's question in the previous talk about scholarly communications. It's ironic to me, given our focus today on digital scholarship, that scholarly communication is so blatantly conservative, at least when you look at the deliverables. I recall Colin's observation this morning about the scholarship in philosophy being explicitly the work of a single author, the heroic model, if you will, and compare that with the way a computer game is produced, massively team-based production, or even with production of a journal paper in high-energy physics, where you routinely have 100 authors on the author list. I think about this symposium. This symposium feels to me structurally almost identical to the sort of thing I remember from graduate school a generation ago. Except maybe a little bit of technology change. Instead of borrowing from the bowling alley overhead projector technology, now we borrow PowerPoint and so on. That means we've lost a little bit of the easy interaction as we scribbled on those old overheads, but we've gained back that wonderful opportunity to present a little bit of media on the screen. But still, basically, our scholarly communication feels to me an awful lot like what it used to be. The scholarly journal, still very much like the journal as it existed and as it evolved in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with articles, peer review, and so on. It's distributed electronically now, I suppose, but that's really not a very big change. Now, maybe that's because we're all a bunch of old fuddy-duddies. Maybe it's because those familiar models, in fact, have some functionality that we don't want to lose. I'm not sure. Either way, what I want to do mostly, in I hope less than the 15 minutes, is talk about the UO Library's support for some incremental change in the way we do scholarly communications. I should note in passing that if Massimo were here, he'd talk about the Petrarch Open Book Project, which does attempt to break down traditional models of scholarly communication. I see the Oregon Petrarch Open Book Project as basically being about performance art, about turning the reading of Petrarch. There's been a huge literature on Petrarch for, 700 years, into performance art. By presenting multiple texts and multiple versions that the reader can compare, by presenting substantial volumes of close critical analysis of detailed passages that you can look at, presumably all easily accessible in a hypertext framework with a user interface that facilitates textual comparisons. But again, I'm not Massimo, so I can't really talk about that in depth. Instead, what I want to talk about is an initiative that has been going on in collaboration with Massimo to support open access publishing at the university. Open access publishing is a growth area. There are now a very large number of online computer journals, something I think my number there is woefully out of date because it's more than a month old. So we're talking about more like 6,000 or more open access journals as described on the Directory of Open Access Journals. They share a characteristic of being open access, which means that they're free to the reader with the cost borne elsewhere in the system, and available under some sort of Creative Commons license or similar license so that the reader can use them without concern over most traditional copyright issues. They have big benefits, which is maybe why they're becoming so popular. There's quite a lot of literature now that indicates that publication in these open access journals improves your citation count, which we all like as academics caring about our reputations. So the UO Libraries is moving in the direction of trying to support such things by serving as a journal publisher for UO faculty who want to be journal editors or UO departments. The goal of this project is the production of open access journals and lowering the barrier of entry for UO scholars who want to create typically a new open access journal, while still maintaining that conservatism in that it is supporting traditional workflows and a traditional model of peer review and journal publishing. The implementation then uses open access software or open source software, particularly a software system called the Open Journal System that one hopes minimizes the costs of that production. Where we are today, we've been actively working on this in collaboration with Oregon State University. We have a pilot journal, Massimo's Humanist Studies in the Digital Age. That's why I'm here standing in for Massimo. The first issue of that is scheduled for publication any day now. Our target had been to be out for this session, but naturally one of the authors hasn't gotten his approval of the galley proofs back to us, so we can't quite go to publication. We have several other journals in the pipeline, a couple here at the UO, and Oregon State is similarly using the same infrastructure in collaboration with us, and if anyone here is interested in publishing a journal, come talk to me. Let me go live if I can and show you. Here's the website at Oregon State of the system, journals.oregondigital.org, and if I scroll down, you'll see that there's Humanist Studies in the Digital Age. Since we're not live, I can't show you what a user would see if they were visiting this journal, but I can log in as one of the editors of the journal and show you a little bit behind the scenes. And give me a moment here. This particular software system is primarily designed to create workflows that make it easy for a journal editor. And so you're seeing some of the user interface from the journal editor's point of view. But I'm going to try to, oops, wrong journal. I'm going to try to quickly skip past most of that because I want to show you a little bit of the finished product. And those of you who are already familiar with the Open Journal system, this is all old hat for you, but many of you, I think, are not. Okay, now we're to the point where if you came to this site a week from today, you'd be able to follow along. It's a traditional journal, a traditional table of contents with a large set of articles with authors and so on. Let me point out a couple of things. We can potentially publish in any one of a variety of formats. We chose, in this particular case, to publish mostly as PDF files. Again, a nod to the past, if you will, but probably effective in terms of producing something that is easy to cite because it has pages, that is easy to print and hence read when you forgot your iPad, and so on. Let me give you a typical journal here, journal article. Here's a journal article that Massimo contributed, and in fact, for those of you who are disappointed not to be hearing about the Oregon Petrarch Open Book Project, you might want to read this article because it's a pretty good summary of it. If you care about finding it or citing it, there's a citation. It's a little bit hard for you to read probably in the background. I guess I can zoom in a little bit here. There we go. And if you're not, I don't know what ABNT format is for citations. This journal uses MLA, so there's your MLA citation. But go to journals.oregondigital.org instead to read about the Oregon Petrarch Open Book. And there are a few other nods to modern technology, a facility for maintaining a comment trail so that we could expect scholars to build a small community engaging in a conversation about the particular article, things like that. But the primary focus of the article, this particular journal is to deliver the full text, and as I noted, it's in PDF. I guess the most important thing on this screen, apart from the reminder of the title of this particular article, is the reminder that what the library wants is to push open access, and so all of this material is licensed under a Creative Commons license, so hence it's freely available. It's the classic take back the means of production Marxist argument, if you will. I think I will stop there and see what there are in terms of questions, but perhaps make sure that we stay on time on the time track for the rest of the session. So, are there questions?
So I have a question.
Okay.
So what is the process? So I, as a faculty member who would be interested in establishing a journal through this possibility, what is my first step.
Your first step is to call me personally, JQ Johnson, or send me email, and we'll discuss your needs. Basically, the library is still in the process of deciding in detail what suite of services makes sense to faculty and that can be provided. Certainly the infrastructure, certainly the assistance to someone who has perhaps never edited a scholarly journal before, and so needs help getting started, needs help understanding the role of your editorial review board, for instance, or the fact that copy editing is hard work, because, of course, we all ignore that because, you know, that's what Taylor and Francis or something does for us. Whereas if you're doing it yourself, you have to figure out how to support that. So I'll have that conversation, and we'll come up with a plan. The other piece of it is actually getting submissions of material. That's not my problem. Okay, so enough of this. And any further questions? Okay, we'll move on then to a somewhat more experimental and radical approach to scholarly publishing and scholarly communications. Oops. There.
I guess we need lights now. We're just going to project our blog and do this old school. And I'm going to ask you, I'm Carol Sabile, and Karen Eslin will be talking after I speak. I'm going to talk first about the kind of philosophy behind Fembot, and Karen's going to talk to you more about the technological aspects of the project. But I'm going to do something odd now and say to those of you who are tweeting, I'm going to ask you not to tweet about this presentation. We're currently, our digital humanities startup grant is being reviewed. And I want to have a conversation with you all about the politics of Fembot. We submitted a proposal that's just for the prototype. As you know, the NEH is very, very concerned, and with some reason, about having projects that appear partisan. We were really clear in our grant proposal that the funding was for the prototype. We're building a 2-level review process. But I'm a little bit concerned about mixing up the politics on the tweets and that getting back to NEH reviewers right now. So I'm happy to answer questions about that complex situation during the Q&A. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins of Fembot. I came to UO in 2008, and I knew that I would have to identify a community of scholars with interests, with interdisciplinary interests in new media. And so what I did is, within the Center for the Study of Women in Society, I organized a research interest group in gender, media, and technology. And we started meeting in spring 2009. We had a reading group. In the fall of that year, a retreat in fall 2009. And during our retreat, the issue of feminist publishing really came to the foreground. It became the center, in fact, of our conversation. And what we concluded at that point was that the time seemed ripe for feminists to seize control over the means of production, not cede control to the corporations that have long dominated the publishing industry or to academic presses with no interest in nurturing or promoting feminist research. And we're really influenced by what Tara McPherson was doing at Vectors, and also her belief that so much of our scholarship as academics has been locked up in silos. So from the beginning, we were really committed to open access. I was fortunate enough to hook up with Karen early on, and it became clear that we wanted an open access journal. We wanted it to be open source. We wanted to have a structure that was transparent enough for other people to adopt it. With Karen's help, we started thinking about this. We used the occasion of a conference. There was a feminist media studies conference here last spring. We used that occasion to network with colleagues around the country, one colleague from Taiwan, some colleagues from Canada, and we decided that we would move ahead with the online journal project. Karen and I agreed to work on an NEH Digital Humanities Startup grant, and we were joined by Bryce Peak, will you just wave, Bryce? A graduate student in anthropology who volunteered his labor, thank you, Bryce, in exchange for experience. And we created the blog with funding from CSWS that will eventually serve as a platform for the journal. Fembot, and we're calling it the Fembot Institute because we thought collaborative or collaboratory was too trendy, and we were looking for some way to describe what we were. If you have any ideas, we're happy. I've never been satisfied with Institute, but a lot of people thought that it had a kind of cultural capital and gravitas that might be helpful. So Fembot now includes faculty members from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, most recently a faculty member from the University of Maryland, Concordia University in Montreal, where a self-identified group of feminist techno-perverts is helping us to think about what we're doing and to give us some inspiration and motivation. A faculty member from National Chengchi University in Taiwan, Washington State University, and Penn State. We'll also be meeting several times. We're really sort of gearing up this spring to start talking about the organization of Fembot, because we wanted that to be a collaborative process, and we wanted to figure out how we were going to govern ourselves, how we were going to constitute ourselves, and how we'd be able to sustain this sort of project over time. So all of that is going to take place this spring, although we have some preliminary ideas. Now, what is Fembot? It's not a traditional humanities journal. We wanted flexibility both in terms of potential multimodal content, but also we wanted control over the review process. We wanted to be able to craft a review process that we felt was feminist, that was collaborative, and that was something that we had built ourselves rather than something we had inherited or that had been imposed upon people. So really, the Fembot project itself at this point has three overlapping components. The first is the Fembot website, which was built using Drupal, and Karen will talk a little bit more about that. The second part of it is a community of scholars researching gender, new media, and technology who will share responsibility for the governance of Fembot. And in a lot of ways, what Fembot does, toot, is kind of cool. Because it not only combines our interest in new media and technology as an object of study, but we're also working with the very tools we'll need to publish in this media landscape. The third part of Fembot is a publication that's going to feature new research on gender, media, and technology. Right now we're thinking that it'll be published twice a year. And until we have a good sense of how many people are going to commit labor and how the review process is going to work, we're going to just stick with those two publications. So again, the goals of Fembot really grew out of feminist thought and practice. We wanted to provide a platform for collaboration in a field, the study of new media and technology, that remains largely impervious to gender analysis. And we also wanted to kind of build this field and to build an identifiable presence in the field where we could bring together graduate students and faculty members and provide mentoring and provide research assistance. It's very utopian, but I think that's fine. We also wanted to intervene in ongoing debates about peer review and publication. Many of us are unhappy as feminist scholars with the limited access to our research, especially for international colleagues. We know people who study fan communities and people who study girl gamers and stuff, we know that there are a lot of people out there with an interest in some of the research that we're doing and that we're interested in. And so providing access to that and having conversations with those populations is really, really important. It's a very, very important part of the project. And we were also dissatisfied with the limits of a peer review process that doesn't understand writing and research as a process. A number of us are from English departments. A number of us, we all teach writing in one way or another. We really take, mentoring junior faculty members and graduate students very seriously, and felt that these new tools gave us a way to model a kind of intellectual community and a kind of process that hitherto really hasn't been available. We also wanted to provide timely, multimodal, and inventive publishing opportunities to showcase research on gender, new media, and technology. It's often the case that you submit to a traditional journal in your field, and it can be a year or more before that article sees the light of day. We felt that, especially with people who are working on new media, that we had to reduce the production process. Okay, so I'm going to talk really quickly about the review process for Fembot before turning things over to Karen. Again, we were really emphasizing reinventing peer review for an online open access, open source environment. As one of my friends put it to me, this is a really interesting moment because if we don't intervene in those debates, the lame people will. And so it's important, I think, especially for more senior colleagues, to get involved in this because things are changing rapidly, and there's a moment, like any moment of crisis, in which I think we can intervene. And so it's really important to do that. So we're imagining 2 levels of peer review. And the first level of review will be internal to Fembot members and invited reviewers for contributions that we think require additional expertise or expertise that's not represented within the Fembot community. And what we kind of have in mind at this point is a review process that's similar to the WordPress blog Kathleen Fitzpatrick is using for planned obsolescence. And we really felt that this is preferable to the kind of weblog scroll used by Haystack and other groups for their forums. Another earlier alternative, if you want to look at it, is Mackenzie Wark's Gamer Theory, although that format is older and more clunky, but it still kind of captures what we're trying to get at. We want contributors and reviewers to be able to speak to one another, and we want other Fembot members to comment not just on the contribution, but on the reviewers' comments as well, right? So we want people to have this kind of dialogue that's never been possible before. And we thought that by encouraging contributors to consider these multiple levels of review, by having reviewers, in fact, be accountable for their comments, we could model the kind of collaborative community that we want to build. And so we're very consciously moving away from blind review in our review process, believing that blind review in subfields in the humanities has always been difficult, if not impossible at best. And those of us who have reviewed for journals will vouch for the fact that we very often know, in a lot of ways, whose student is submitting a paper or who's submitting a paper. And second, we also believe that academics, like contributors to online forums, tend to behave more generously and respectfully when they're not anonymous. And C, we, especially because this is an interdisciplinary field, it's really helpful for contributors to know the disciplinary perspective of those who review their interdisciplinary research. I think that's really crucial to understanding and respectfully and generatively responding to their commentary. If you don't know what field people come from, often their comments can seem, as if they come out of thin air. So that's the first level of review. The second level of review, and this would happen after the contributor has had the opportunity to revise her or his text based on the commentary provided in the first level of review. And we're anticipating a 2-month period for author revisions. Then the contribution goes public for an additional 2 months. And this would be a moderated discussion open to scholars not affiliated with Fembot as well as the general public. So after the authors had a chance to do the first revision, the contribution goes public and other people can comment on it. Now after the author has addressed any additional comments, the contribution gets published and then it'll be archived in a specific issue. That'll be edited by Fembot's first guest editor, who will be deciding this spring. We're really envisioning a fully online process that shares goals with the Social Science Research Council's dissertation proposal development program, insofar as it can aid those scholars working in emerging research areas or across traditional disciplines to connect with each other, to see what kind of research is going to be most relevant to what they're working on, and really to kind of, create a community that's often difficult to locate or create. So that's all I got, and I'll pass it along to Karen. After Karen's done, we'll see, if Bryce has anything he wants to add.
Great.
So it's about 5 minutes.
Oh, good. Well, I'll try and I'll go quickly and leave time for questions. So I'm mainly going to talk about the prototype, and thankfully JQ already talked a lot about open access and open source, so I'll just skip that part of my talk. What is very different, though, about what we're trying to do is we're trying to really break down this model. So what you see in things like Open Journal System and a lot of online publications is they're taking the print publication and then they're just putting it online, right? The PDF is a great example of that. And we're saying, well, that's really not what we want and what we need. And right now we're at a time where commercial publishers are making so much money off of our current infrastructure that they have no reason to try and change this model. There is nothing that is actually incentivizing them to do anything differently. So what we're trying to actually do is take control of the model and say, what is it actually that we need? And what is going to make our research better, whether it's studying the digital object, whether it's using the digital tools and presenting them online, and how is that all going to function in a way that makes sense. And then in this prototype, I think what is crucial is that it doesn't have to be isolated to Fembot. So part of the components that we're building in Drupal will include the commenting system, as Carol pointed out. Another way to think of it, for those of you who haven't seen planned obsolescence, is kind of like the Microsoft Word commenting, when you're commenting in the side, or if you're going to tag and comment within a photo on Flickr. But so that it's all there layered in a way that a dialogue is presented rather than scrolling in kind of a hierarchical fashion. Another part of the system we're building is where those comments can actually be aggregated. So I, as a scholar, could take all of my comments together and put them in my portfolio so I could showcase them and show them as part of the contributions that I had made to that field. And that's another way, really, that we want to, again, incentivize this activity and make sure that we're really promoting this production. So with this tool, because it's not limited to just a journal, you could use this in your dissertation. You could have people comment on it in class. There are certainly multiple types of publications, or if you're working on a book, it's not just that publication environment. It's the commenting, the portfolio, and the publication all wrapped into one. The reason we chose Drupal is because it is widely established on lots of academic campuses, so it's not one of those specialized softwares that has to be treated by itself. It also has very wide adoption in the professional world, so thank goodness we look outside for some actual competitors and companies who are putting investments into these open source technologies beyond what we just do in academia, so we see a real growth. I'm going to just talk really quickly because I know I'm out of time, but I want to put in as the librarian the other thing that I think is really essential about this product is we want to make sure that this is part of the scholarly record. So a lot of the tools that are looking at new media objects, whether they used Flash or something like that, all of a sudden you can't open those files, and that just, the information is gone. So part of the process that we'll be working on is actually editorial guidelines that will specify the kind of content or kind of supplementary materials that you'll want to give us in addition to the presentation form so that we can make sure that that research is available for the future. And with that, I'm going to do actually my funny quote at the end. So I got inspired this week, so bear with me. All right. So 30 years ago, we couldn't know that something called the internet would lead to a scholarly publishing revolution. What can we do? What scholars do better than anyone else is spark the creativity and imagination of our students and peers. We're the community that put books on shelves and data on zip disks. The community of Descartes and de Beauvoir, of archive.org and vectors. In academia, innovation doesn't change our lives. It is how we make our living.
So there's five minutes for questions.
Bryce, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Except for the commenting system. I don't know where we are at this point in realizing it and or imagining it.
We need money.
We need money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be quite easy question.
Bryce, just finish and I'll repeat it. Sorry.
So the commenting system is going to have the ability to also comment on comments.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's an important part of the system because you're going to be able to daisy chain. If somebody makes a comment and you're like, what is this guy talking about? You can ask him what he's talking about, as opposed to creating a comment that's 50 pages down, 50 things down. What are you talking about?
Yeah, Bryce is re-emphasizing the dialectic nature of the commentings, and you can comment on the comments, which is an essential part that we want to build into the system. Yes.
I'm going to put this in decorously. What's your plan for craft control? Because we have this problem in bad subjects. So
Yeah.
the view system wasn't open. It was just an old-fashioned left established by a collective computer. But
Yet Jonathan's question had to do with quality control. I'll call it quality control, and how we'll deal with the problem of having submissions that aren't appropriate, that aren't ready for publication. And we thought that by having FemBot be an institute, first of all, the first thing that we would do would be solicit from members. And so that might be one initial level of quality control, especially in the beginning. But then you're right. I mean, and I think that what some of us had talked about, and correct me, there are other FemBot members scattered throughout the audience. You know, I think that what we had talked a little bit about that, as well as problems with spam and trolling. You know, I think that what we'll do is we'll have guest editors for various issues, and those are the people who will have to run interference. If they feel that something isn't appropriate, they can send it to other members of the Institute just for a reality check, because it's always helpful. I mean, sometimes people see things in an article or a submission that you don't see, and so I think it's really important to give that submission a chance. But then they're going to have to respond and say exactly that, right? This isn't ready for publication. This isn't what we have in mind. Here are the things that you need to do. But we do think that that's an important part of the mentoring process, rather than the flat out. We were comparing notes at a thing last week where two of us who had submitted to American Studies Quarterly got basically the same rejection for two very different articles that had to do with it not being timely enough. And we don't want people to have that experience. We want people to get some feedback, no matter how bad the submission is. There's a chance to intervene there and to give them something productive to take away, I think.
So we should move to the next presentation.
Could I, could I ask to have the lights down, please, just a little bit up front? This afternoon, Eric Steiner, my colleague, and I are going to do a kind of tag team presentation. So I hope we'll try to make that transition as smooth as possible.
Hi.
Just a personal anecdote. I began the digital work on Rome about 8 years ago. I walked into the infographics lab, and I was introduced to Eric Steiner by Jim Meacham, the director of the lab. And I quickly learned that Eric, I'm an architect, and I discovered that Eric, who's a geographer, cartographer, thought like an architect. And Eric paid me the great compliment of saying that I thought like a geographer / cartographer. So I think that's been the basis for a very productive collaboration, and one that's been a lot of fun. The projects that we would like to talk about this afternoon are basically 3 in number, and they extend over an 8-year period. And they include work that has had various, let's say, impacts, or they've been disseminated in different ways, and we'll go into that a little bit. And I think rather than talking about the theory of all of these, what I'd like to do is to give you a snapshot of each one, and I think important issues will emerge as we discuss them. I would like to say as a preface, however, that the study of Rome for me has been something that I began as a graduate student, and I've lived in Rome for a part of my life and enjoyed it tremendously. My interest in Rome has resulted, is really generated by two factors or two concerns. First of all, I believe the study of Rome is important for its intrinsic value. It is the center of Western civilization, and I think there are many lessons to be learned there. As an architect, I also see it as instrumental That is, there are lessons to be learned for students of architecture or any student who's concerned about the physical and cultural environment. Now, moving on a little bit, I also wanted to say something to Don Harris, if he's here. I'm not sure if he's here still. Yes. The grant that Eric and I received from the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium was a milestone for us in the sense that the $10,000 grant and $5,000 subsequent award for our effort was really a breakthrough for us. And to date, we've generated, I don't know, depending on your accounting, maybe $500,000 in research toward our work. So starting a project that we thought 12 people would be interested in, we've had the good fortune of developing 2 websites that have had probably as many as 150,000 hits, and considering that 10,000 of those were mine, it's still a considerable number. The 3 projects that I wanted to talk about this afternoon with Eric are the ones listed here or noted here. The first is the most recent. This is a traveling exhibition that has a complement of digital media, and it's an exhibition which was at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. Giuseppe Vazzi's Rome: Lasting Impressions from the Age of the Grand Tour. Myself and James Harper, Associate Professor of Art History, were curators of the exhibition. And then there was an important, very important collaboration with the Infographics Lab, Eric Steiner, and also Ken Cato, who's in the back of the room there now, along with students, both graduate and undergraduate students who helped on the project. I'll be talking about each of these in turn more. The interactive website, Imago Urbis, Giuseppe Vazzi's Grand Tour of Rome, was developed with Eric and myself, along with collaborators in Rome and students here at the U of O. And what got this whole thing started is the 2005 interactive Noli Map website, authored by myself and Eric and collaborators listed here, particularly Alan Seen, Mark Brenneman, and Ben Humphrey. So, Giuseppe Vazzi's Rome, and here I would direct your attention, if not now, perhaps after our session is over, if you're so inclined. There is a touchscreen monitor in the back of the room, which was part of the exhibition. There are also some iPads that we have here too, which were designed especially for that exhibition. The exhibition itself, perhaps some of you had an opportunity to see the show, consisted of 120 works of art from the 18th century, from the Getty Museum to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and points in between. And the show dealt with, was designed as a thematic display that included cartography, the pictorial tradition in 18th century Rome representing the city, something very close to my heart, the social and cultural issues and factors contributing to the phenomenon of the Grand Tour, which is really the grandfather of modern tourism. So this show had kiosks installed, which were touchscreen activated, which were designed by Eric. I don't know if you want to say anything about that at this point. Designed by Eric to really dive into the content and make it accessible to the museum-going public. One of the principles that was very important for us in thinking about this exhibition with Jamie Harper and Eric and Ken and others was that the work that, the original artwork was work that was to be privileged, that was not to be sidelined with the digital media. So our goal was to find ways to enhance the original works of art. So in this particular room or gallery of the larger gallery, it was possible to use iPads that were strategically placed in front of works of art that would allow the visitor to delve more deeply into those works of art, compare them with other artists. In other words, to do things that would not have been possible in a traditional museum setting. We'd get that extra depth and resonance with the work. This is another view. This example in particular is looking at the Noli map that Doug mentioned with an iPad positioned in front of it so that one could actually see in a kind of microscopic way the map itself. So you had the real thing, and then you had other ways of understanding it and interpreting it as well. Did you want to say something about the website, the Noli map website?
One of the things I'd like to share is just simply the process we've gone about. As Jim showed you, we've kind of started with this Noli map website back in 2004, 2005, and evolved to the point where we had this museum exhibit that showed this fall and will be continuing on to Princeton and possibly other locations. One of the strategies we've really used is probably not to be so much so self-reflective about kind of what does digital media mean and how is it used, and less the more scholarship about digital media and more just content producers being really active producers of that content and generating it such that it's platform independent. It's content that can be rehashed, remixed, reused, mainly for our own purposes, but potentially for other people and for their own uses. Along those lines, so all the content we created for this original Noli map website has really been stored in a database. We've taken advantage of the Infographics Lab GIS systems to be able to support databases that can include the imagery and all the digitized content associated with this project that we did in 2004, 2005. That content was then also ported over to the subsequent website, the Vazzi's Grand Tour of Rome, and then ultimately to the museum exhibit, where we could leverage the content to support the iPad applications that Jim has referenced, and also the touchscreen applications. So if we look back, do kind of a little retrospective here, this was a really early foray into a form of digital scholarship, of online publishing. We made an effort here to combine the digital content of the map application, map interface that's accessible through this link. This was done sort of in the era before Google Maps and Google Earth became really prevalent. So this is one of the really early, really robust map engines to be able to navigate information spatially, entirely based on the Noli map that Jim referenced earlier. But as part of that publication, we didn't want it to just be about the imagery there. So there's the Noli map itself. We didn't want it to strictly be about reconstructing an image, a historic map of the city, but also have an analytical component to it. And so with that published website, we included several themes that we wanted to encourage. We had sort of imagined this idea of an online journal that would ultimately get several contributors. We didn't have the funding and support to really solicit submissions and to gather that community, but we had a entire database system to support it. We had all these things going, but we never made that next step. And so actually what ultimately made it onto the website was really strictly the articles that we published in that first date. But the seeds of these kinds of things were there pretty early. So our model from here was so here's the map. One of the things we did, we just have a few slides here about that reconstruction process, taking the 12 plates of the map and forming it into a single whole, which really provided the crux of the website and the analysis associated with it. I'm not sure if you wanted to make specific points about these. But one of the features here is that it's extremely accurate, and it matches up to the modern day photography. Our idea here is really that if we are able to catalog and record these rich data sets that can emerge from these historic maps, really that cartographers that thought of themselves as database experts that stored incredible amounts of information in these documents. If we can catalog it and store it and build on that and build layers into it, we can subsequently provide a platform for other scholars to have interpretations about it and to really uncover the spatial logic of the past, the spatial logic of Rome in this case. That model for Jim's interest is really about the urban form, urbanism, but also includes the interest in the social experience, the kind of experience of the city of Rome. So being able to examine the city through this spatial perspective really offers a lot of opportunities.
For example, this diagram you're looking at here, it doesn't project very well, is mapped on the Noli map, which incidentally was so accurate that it was used by the city of Rome right through 1960. It still is the best map to look at the center of the city, the most accurate. This is a map showing the wall circuits of Rome, which emerge or start in the Palatine Hill, that kind of blue zone in the middle, and move out to the Republican and later Imperial wall circuit and some of the Renaissance and Baroque and medieval wall circuits to the left. So that simple problem of how do you represent how the city grew is here represented in one way and can become the basis then for a more intense investigation. I think that what we've done is in amassing information is, facts are basically inert unless you do something with them. So once those facts are understood, patterns begin to emerge, a structure can be discerned, then I think one is on the road to making insights, which can be very important. And one of the aspects of working in a digital environment is that it's possible to make connections that in the print world were just very hard to make. I mean, the map is 6 feet by 8 feet. There are books over here that have information, and books in another library perhaps that are folio size that make that coming together a very difficult proposition. The media, I don't know if anyone's mentioned Marshall McLuhan, maybe it's me in my generation, but the media for us has allowed a more fluid and seamless investigation where I think, at least for us, important discoveries have been made. Should we? Okay, how am I doing on time? I'm probably over.
You have about 1 minute.
Okay. This is some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that was part of our investigation. So this is really powerful software, ArcGIS, which is the really industry standard for looking at maps. And these are various projections of the city. This is the VASI website, and the challenge with the VASI website was to link the historical iconographic map or plan view map with the pictorial view of Rome. And so two great 18th century masters, Vasi and Noli, were brought together. On the right-hand side is an image of the city taken from Noli, and what we've done is we've plotted the precise point at which Vasi did that view, which is the center one of the three. They're also comparing it to other Vedutisti or other urban scene painters of the time. The other thing that we've done is show the contemporary view with the 18th century view. It's a hard job to go to Rome and take all these photographs, but someone had to do it. And this is a map then of all the sites that Vasi recorded in the city, 238 over about a 20-year period, a little bit less, and each is shown in a precise location and also with the direction of the view and the angle of the view shed, which gives one a kind of capillary understanding of the city. Again, some behind-the-scenes views. This one, the Piazza Navona, that you see here. Some views from the website. I wanted to actually end by talking about another project that we have in the works called the Spatial History of Rome, the GIS Forma Urbis Roma project that we were fortunate enough to have funded by the Loki Initiative for Science and the Human Condition, which is looking at the city as a series of layers. So the dimension of the city and how it's understood in Rome is, of course, chronological and historical, but also is spatial, which both works horizontally and vertically in that city, giving us a very interesting, complex, and rich mixture to begin to unravel. Maybe I'll just end there.
Yeah, so you have about 5 minutes for questions.
So maybe there's... Yes, Ken. Right. I think Ken's point is that the seeds of digital technology and scholarship of this sort is not neatly delimited. You're not quite sure where it might go. And I think certainly when Eric began our NOLI project back in 2003, 2005, at least I didn't have any idea that it would have the kind of impact that it's had.
So we're at the end of our time, so what we have both questions.
Yeah, I just have a brief question, and this might not be a concern to you, but I know you said in the Bosnia position you attempted to work and not overwhelm artwork with the digital media, and in practice, did you find that that was successful? Did you get any feedback on that?
Well, we have had a roundtable or a kind of debriefing from the exhibition, and Sharon Kaplan, who was the person in charge of that aspect of the exhibition and very fine worker at the museum, gave me the impression that the digital component was a very popular part of the show, that maybe not surprisingly, young people engaged with it in a very robust way. Nothing got broken, but very robust way, and they liked it. They had fun. Others have just anecdotally told me that actually the original work of art, you could, in some cases, you couldn't get that close because of security reasons. So the digital monitor actually allowed you to get that microscope up and actually look at the detail that you really wouldn't even been able to see with the naked eye, really that close. So there's that, I think, that aspect of it, and I think it's. I'd like to imagine that it maybe helped establish a kind of character or a mood for the material, that it, yes, is 18th century work and Rome is great and wonderful, the eternal city, but that again, the lessons of the city, what we have to learn, are still there. What are the lessons? Buildings don't have to be objects. Buildings can be connected to some kind of urban tissue. The space is important, not just left over. Piazzae, streets, are ways in which we live in the city. So I think that I think some of that came through more robustly than it would have otherwise.
So please join me in thanking our panelists there. We will be taking a break to follow up with this. I hope you're all aware that there's this incredible Twitter feed that's happening simultaneous with the presentations. Right before this one, somebody tweeted out, we're reconvening, the old people are up. Well, next up are the graduate students at your team.
By the way, the Twitter feed for all of you who aren't already contributing to it. Some of us are older than others. You don't do.
It's all relative. Looks better on the screen.